Hello. In this video, I am sharing with you about the iPhone 13 mini. I trust that this video is very useful for all of you who love Apple iPhones, and when you have already watched the video, you know about iPhone 13 mini clearly and you can choose a better phone to properly use for your work or lifestyles. I will introduce you to the detailed iPhone 13 mini, everything that's new and especially pros and cons of iPhone 13 mini at the end of the video. Please kindly enjoy watching the video as following. iPhone 13 mini review, the small phone that's actually good. In 2020, Apple attempted to revive the small flagship with the iPhone 12 mini, and further improved it with the 2021 iPhone 13 mini. These phones were made for people that want a tiny handset that still does not compromise with performance and camera. While the users that have them loved them, it seems sales weren't high, as the mini line was discontinued in 2022. For the time being, the iPhone 13 mini is your last chance at getting a tiny smartphone with flagship qualities. Does it still hold up in 2023? Apple is famous for pushing out software updates for years, so we are not worried about the iPhone 13 mini reaching end of life anytime soon. But what about its hardware performance, camera, and battery life? iPhone 13 mini, everything that's new. Don't fix what's not broken is Apple's mantra here, and the iPhone 13 mini feels instantly familiar to anyone who's handled the iPhone 12 mini in the past. There are a few new improvements and a couple of things have been shuffled around, but it's mostly the same winning formula from last year. TLDR iPhone 13 mini new features. Slightly thicker body, camera lenses now in diagonal layout. Slightly bigger battery than last year, results in longer battery life. Smaller notch on the screen, narrower, but slightly deeper. Brighter display. Larger sensor on the main camera. New photo styles to customize camera output. New cinematic mode for video. Base storage is now 128 GB. New Apple A15 Bionic processor. The iPhone 13 mini is basically the same shape and size as the iPhone 12 mini. The slightly added thickness is barely noticeable considering the tiny size of the device, but the added battery life is definitely there. The included Apple A15 Bionic chip is powerful and still very much adequate for late 2022/early 2023. In fact, it still outperforms most processors in top-tier Android phones. The OLED screen is 28% brighter than before, and the iPhone 13 mini screen is surprisingly easy to view under direct sunlight, be it for messages, viewfinder use, or video playback. The glass is still the ceramic shield that was introduced in 2021, great branding, not really scratch-proof. A random speck of sand can still ruin your day. Apple getting generous with storage? The base storage has been increased to 128 GB, which is a huge deal. The iPhone 13 mini now costs $629 at its base tier, and that 128 GB will be plenty enough for most users. Especially considering that customers that go for the tiny phones aren't usually the power user kind. The iPhone 13 mini is a solid camera phone that does well in both well-lit and nighttime scenarios. You don't get the telephoto lens of the iPhone 13 Pro and Pro Max, so no super zooming or fancy portraits. You can still do portrait mode with the wide-angle lens. But you still get to play with the, somewhat iffy, cinematic mode for video recording and the new photographic styles for photo post-processing, which completely change the camera's color and contrast calibration. Yeah, cinematic mode was shown off for the iPhone 13 Pro, but the iPhone 13 mini also has some chops with its duo of rear cameras. Lightning port, the return. No surprise here, the iPhone 13 mini still has a Lightning data port, instead of moving to USB-C. And no, there's no charger in the box, but thankfully we still get the Lightning cable. Is the iPhone 13 mini worth buying? If you are rocking an iPhone 12 mini, hold on to it, unless you are really craving an upgrade in battery life. In all other aspects, the Apple iPhone 13 mini is a slightly better 12 mini. If you are coming from an older model, or you are looking for a new phone that is a compact, reliable package, the iPhone 13 mini is a definite buy. It checks all the right boxes, -1, a high refresh rate screen. This one is still a pain point as the non-Pro models are stuck to 60 Hz. Come on, we could have gotten at least 90 Hz on the cheaper models, Apple. No? No. Don't get a mini just because it's cheaper. If you are looking at the iPhone 13 mini solely for its price, consider whether that small screen might be a hindrance for you. Most people seem to prefer a larger iPhone, obviously, since the sales of the mini series were disappointing for Apple. So, with that in mind, if you think that you will ultimately prefer having a bigger screen, do consider dropping that $100 extra for the regular iPhone 13 or just go for last year's iPhone. Or, you can actually buy an iPhone 12 for the same cost as a 13 mini. You will get a bigger screen plus bigger battery, and the iPhone 12 is still getting updates. iPhone 13 mini alternatives. For what it offers, there are not many alternatives for the tiny munchkin. It just happens to be the most powerful small phone. The Sony Xperia 5 III is sort of a compact flagship on the Android side, but it's still very noticeably taller than an iPhone mini. Then, there's the Pixel 5, which sports mid-range hardware, but is now a couple of years old. The Asus Zenfone 9 is a very unique, comparably tiny Android flagship from 2022. iPhone 13 mini display. The iPhone 13 mini has an OLED screen with a 5.4-inch diagonal and a 1080 by 2340 pixel resolution. This results in a pixel density of 477 ppi. It's quite sharp and pleasing to the eye, especially at that size. You won't be noticing individual pixels. Now, 5.4 inches may sound huge by old standards, but know that the iPhone 13 mini has an aspect ratio of 19.5:9, which makes the screen much narrower than it would have been in the classic 16:9 days. In shape, the iPhone 13 mini is not much bigger than a classic iPhone 5 or a first-generation iPhone SE. Notch inch is perfect. The Face ID enabling notch over the top of the screen has been slightly redesigned. It's now narrower, but a hair deeper than before. It does look slightly cleaner than before, but it's still very present. I've never been bothered by the notch, but if you are one of the people that are, this redesign won't do much for you. Is a smaller notch better than no notch at all? I think it's the same deal. Not sure why this redesign was needed, especially since it doesn't open up any room for more notifications and stats on the top of the screen. We have a feeling the tighter notch was made to open up more room for the main camera sensor, which is bigger this year. It doesn't look like much was changed in the size of the Face ID array, it was just reshuffled. 60 Hz screen, again. The other main gripe we have with the screen is the 60 Hz screen refresh ratio. 120 Hz is reserved for the iPhone 13 Pro line, naturally. One might have hoped that the cheap iPhone 13 units would at least get 90 Hz, which is still much better than 60 Hz. But nope, Apple stuck to the old refresh rate. Is the refresh rate a big deal? Once you've gotten used to 120 Hz, it kind of is. If you have an iPad Pro and an iPhone 13 mini, you will definitely notice it every time when switching between devices. Hey, on the upside, at least this will make your iPad Pro look super smooth and responsive all over again, every time you switch to it after using the iPhone 13 mini for a prolonged time. Apple claimed the iPhone 13 mini has a 28% brighter screen than the predecessor. This helps for both daytime operation and for viewing Dolby Vision HDR content with rich contrast on your iPhone 13 mini. And, since the iPhone cameras have been able to record Dolby Vision HDR since last year, it only makes sense that you will want a screen that can view it. Does it make a difference for the casual user? Not really. And considering the iPhone 13 mini is kind of aimed at the casual users, maybe there isn't much benefit to be had here. But hey, the screen still looks great under direct sunlight, so that's there for everybody. iPhone 13 mini design. Other than the slightly changed notch on the screen, the design is the same cute box we have grown familiar with. Well, the camera system has also been shuffled around a bit, with the lenses placed in a diagonal to one another, instead of being on a vertical line. It does look a bit weird, doesn't it? We assumed we'd get used to it, but it's still a matter of personal preference. Some people still find the look odd. Thanks to that rear camera redesign, the bump has grown by just a bit, which means your old iPhone 12 mini cases won't fit the iPhone 13 mini. As for MagSafe accessories, they still work and fit as before. Wallets, stands, chargers, and clamps should be all good unless otherwise noted by the seller. The boxy design really works for the iPhone 13 mini. It has that iPhone 5 but modern feel to it. The buttons are clicky, with nice tactile feedback for every press. And that signature mute switch is still there. I have to admit, I play around with it like it's a satisfying fidget toy and it never gets old. I have seen some that were broken after long use, so I guess I am not the only one. iPhone 13 mini camera. The iPhone 13 mini gets some new camera features, which were only available on the iPhone 12 Pro Max the year before. This includes the bigger sensor and the sensor shift stabilization. Main sensor is bigger. For one, the sensor's pixels are now sized at 1.7 m, bigger than the 12 mini's 1.4 m. A bigger sensor with bigger pixels means that the iPhone is able to gather more light as you press the shutter button, which allows it to work at faster speeds, reducing blur, and capturing better low-light photos. The iPhone 13 mini is an impressive little camera phone, though it's already feeling a bit outdated compared to the latest top-tier phones of 2022. Still, for a phone whose function is primarily to be super compact, we'd say the camera is still pretty good. Ultra-wide camera is mostly the same. The ultra-wide camera seems to be very much like last year's mini model, at least on the specs sheet. The non-Pro line has skipped camera upgrades to the ultra-wide snapper this year, it seems like. When looking at daytime photos, it seems they are pretty much similar to what we used to get with the old mini, warm, detailed, with corrected distortion. Not bad ultra-wide shots. Certainly not as crazy on the new Pro models, but still on the top end. There's a noticeable difference when shooting ultra-wide at night, though, more on that below. The new iPhone 13 mini seems to be much more contrast-wide, producing deeper shadows, but it's also sharper. Last year's mini gave us brighter nighttime photos, but with noticeably softer details. Night mode on every camera. Night mode makes a return, the slow shutter mode, which automatically activates when it's dark. It can take long exposure from 1 to up to 3 seconds, then stitch all the frames together and make a nice, sharp image. It's sharper and clearer than last year's model and definitely among the best night mode solutions out there. Then, there's a real big difference in the ultra-wide camera. The iPhone 13 mini's ultra-wide shots are noticeably darker, but also contrastier and sharper, which I happen to like better. iPhone 13 mini speakers. Just as before, we have a stereo speaker setup, a bottom-firing driver and an earpiece that can be amped up to work as the second channel. It gets a good volume out and sounds quite clear. Compression has been cleaned up and more instruments come out, even at max volume. Don't expect miracles, though. Tiny phone, tiny acoustic space, tiny speakers. It doesn't have a massive amount of mids or a good bass. It sounds a bit nasally and can be harsh, depending on the song. Unlike the Pro Max, which sounds quite massive, the 13 mini speakers are best used for ringtones and alarms. It can sound okay for YouTube videos and some light, non-exacting song listening, while washing the dishes, for example. iPhone 13 mini performance and software. Consistently solid, there's just no other way to say it. The Apple A15 Bionic is, no surprise there, a powerhouse of a chip. But so was the A14 Bionic. The truly impressive part here is the improved energy efficiency, as the iPhone 13 minis has better battery life than last year's model. As for performance in heavy tasks, the iPhone 13 mini has the chops, but when we ran it through a true stress test, it throttled faster than its bigger siblings in the line. Probably due to heat dissipation constraints introduced by the tiny body. In real life, though, I wouldn't say I felt a drop while running a video editor like in Light Video Leap or gaming on COD Mobile. There's also the consideration that small phones are usually not marketed towards, or sought by, power users. And I have to admit, I only did video editing and gaming on the small screen because I had to, not because I was enticed to. I'd much rather grab a bigger phone or even a tablet for that task. Still, the throttling poses the question of how future-proof the iPhone 13 mini and its chipset are. All I can say for now is that the 12 mini has lasted a year so far and had no issues. As can be expected, it now ships with iOS 16 on board and will be receiving updates for at least 4 years more. Here's to iOS 20. It brings new privacy features with iCloud Plus, Private Relay, which is basically a VPN, and Hide My Email, which lets you sign up to any website with a spoofed email, so you can divert spam and not reveal your real address. FaceTime improvements like Portrait Mode, which blurs your background, and the new voice isolation mode for the microphone. The latter is absolute dark magic in how super effective it is and is a new feature for any Apple iPhone that gets iOS 15, not just the 13 series. There's the new Risk of Falling Analyzer, which measures the user's gait without the need of an Apple Watch, which is pretty cool. There's a system-wide translator now, which lets you grab text from any picture and copy or translate it. Basically, an Apple version of system-wide Google Translate. A new system for Do Not Disturb, now called Focus Mode, which lets you really get in there, customize, and automate how your Do Not Disturb works, from time of day to location to actual activities. It's quite granular. And we haven't even touched on the new Safari, which now supports extensions on the mobile iOS and iPadOS. There's tons to dive in, and iOS 15 feels like a really fleshed-out build of the Apple mobile operating system. Now if it would only allow me to arrange the home screen icons to a custom grid, that would be great. Lastly, Face ID performs much the same. It has really grown since the days of the Apple iPhone X. But for the iPhone 13 line specifically, Apple didn't make any additional improvements to its viewing angle. Though, to be fair, I don't remember when the last time when Face ID gave me any trouble unlocking was. There haven't been any major issues with software on the iPhone 13 mini. Since the release, we have seen regular updates too. iOS 15.1 added SharePlay for FaceTime, plus it unlocked the ProRes video recording feature on the iPhone 13 Pro series. Shortly after, iOS 15.1.1 fixed call drop issues, and most recently, iOS 15.2 added an app privacy report feature where you can see how often apps access your location, camera and other possibly sensitive features. iPhone 13 mini battery life. On stage, Apple touted a 1.5-hour increase in battery life of the iPhone 13 mini over the iPhone 12 mini. Now, the 12 mini did need improvement in that area, but what does that 1.5-hour mark mean and how does it translate to our real-life usage? Do we actually get better battery life on the iPhone 13 mini? First, we have a browsing test, basically opening websites at even intervals with both phones at equal brightness, scrolling through, and moving on to the next site. In this test, the iPhone 13 mini lasted for about 1 hour and 37 minutes more than the iPhone 13 mini. For YouTube streaming, we just ran an endless binge and watched which phone will die first. Again, the iPhone 13 mini outlasted its predecessor by 1 hour and 10 minutes. Lastly, for gaming, we had a really impressive result. The iPhone 13 mini scored 1 hour and 34 minutes over the iPhone 12 mini, fulfilling the promise Apple made. And in real life? Yeah, I wouldn't say the iPhone 13 mini is a battery champ by any means. But I definitely found myself hitting the low power mode much later in the evening. Of course, that is if I spent the day with no wireless charger in my vicinity. Nowadays, a lot of us just have a charging puck on our work desk. So, for the size and power, I have to give kudos to the iPhone 13 mini. It won't get you that 2-day battery life, but it definitely can be reliable throughout a regular day. iPhone 13 mini release date. The iPhone 13 mini was announced on the 14th of September 2021, and began shipping on the 24th of September. It's still being shipped and sold by Apple, so you don't need to worry about scavenging for new old stock items at third-party retailers. iPhone 13 mini pros and cons. Pros. Compact, light, comfortable to carry. Bright and accurate screen. Great camera system. Fast performance. 128 GB base storage. Cons. 60 Hz screen. Small screen is not for power users, feels cramped. Battery life is okay, but still the worst in the lineup. Thank you for watching. See you next videos.